Hello and welcome back to the Audible Finish, a weekly show discussing the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I'm your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanassia. Welcome, Thanassia.
Hello, it's so good to be here on the show.
In this week's episode, we review the events from WWE Smackdown and Raw, including AJ Styles' Smackdown return and the Intercontinental Championship match between Gunther and The Miz. Later on, we'll also talk about what happened over in AEW, including Jay White's victory over Jon Moxley to set up a three-way semi-final match to decide the Gold League winner of the Continental Classic. We'll finish this week's episode with a 2023 review of the year in wrestling, discussing various categories, including who we believe is the best wrestler of this year. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. Well, Thanasi, on that note, let's dive right into WWE Smackdown. Do you want to take us through some discussion points for this week's Smackdown?
Well, let me just give you a brief recap. So, Roman Reigns opened up the show. He was teasing something about a man of honor that's going to succeed him, and there were chants of Randy and Yeet in response to that. Of course, it's neither of them, and it's not even Jimmy, but rather Solo that he's referring to. Randall Keith interrupts, says he acknowledges Roman as a legend, but he is the legend killer. And the challenge is set for the Royal Rumble. And I guess my discussion point coming out of this, Dimitri, is he's in his 40s now. Do you think that Randy Orton can feasibly become world champion again? Can we get to that number 15? Dare I say even 16?
I think we definitely can. I certainly see it in his future, but, and this is a big but, I don't think it will go the way he hopes when he goes up against Roman Reigns right now.
Oh, certainly not. No. I was thinking more on just the idea of can this be a credible challenger, someone you believe that is going to have a real shot. In any case, I agree with you. I agree with you that he won't be defeating Roman, but he certainly will be. Well, I can see him being world champion again. And let me just run through a little bit more of the card because my second discussion point actually is quite relevant to this. So just getting briefly through the show, Grayson Waller took on Carmelo Hayes in an excellent match. This was a great TV match. Grayson Waller hit an innovative playmaker actually off the top rope, which actually made the playmaker look really cool. It was like an O driver or an MVP version of the playmaker, if you will. Carmelo also showed off his offense really well off the ropes, and he actually got the win off of a diving fame asser. So he's going to face the winner of the other match in the semifinals next week, and that other match was Kevin Owens versus Austin Theory. And this was another really lovely TV match. And what this proves is just how important the role of a mid-card title is on television. So we've really been missing that from SmackDown. And I guess we've been able to deal with missing a world champion because it's the prize fighter, but your mid-card belt really should be all about the about showcasing your talent on television. Dimitri, wouldn't you agree that like KO getting the win after the strike with the cast, and now we're building towards the storyline with Logan Paul's titanium hand? Would you say that we need more of this kind of US title stuff on TV if we're not going to have the world title on the screen?
Absolutely. It's not even a question for me. And the it's the one benefit that you can have with an absentee world champion is that it puts more stock on the secondary title. And this was something that Gunther, when he was on SmackDown, did excellently. And he's continuing to do it even on Raw, but with him having gone to Raw, there was that bit of absence that was felt with Austin Theory's reign, in my opinion. So actually doing a little bit more to make it interesting is only a plus.
Well, moving on to the remainder of the show, the Kabuki Warriors defeated Zelina and Michim in their pursuit of the women's tag titles. And then in the main event, Randy Orton took on Jimmy Uso. Randy Orton did win this match, and in the post-match brawl, which involved the Bloodline, Randy Orton, and LA Knight, we also got the return of one AJ Styles. So, really, the whole discussion point here, aside from AJ Styles decking LA Knight but not touching Randy Orton, is how do we book this scrumptious combination given the clothesline that AJ hit? Are we going to have a fatal four-way, or are we going to have a number one contendership triple threat with the winner going to the Royal Rumble? Or are we just going to have two singles matches, like an AJ versus LA Knight on TV and then Randy versus Roman on pay-per-view? What do you think?
Well, those are all very interesting prospects that I see. I have to be frank, I quite like the idea of a multi-man championship defense for Roman because that's something that he hasn't had to do, I think, since maybe WrestleMania 37 when he faced
Mm.
Daniel Bryan and Edge at the time, as they were known. So I like the idea of as we approach the next Mania, which some are considering might be the end. It may not, but I like the idea of giving him that unique challenge, and I think it will do wonders as well if Nick Aldis announced it to sort of stamp his authority on the tribal chief.
And I think my thought is that usually we have these kinds of multi-man matches very frequently, especially with baby faces, so that you can sell the whole idea of the champ can lose the strap without being defeated. But we haven't actually had that with Roman. He's always had that opportunity to be, the to dominate his opponent and then win even with cheating. So I think this is a good opportunity to go for that. Although it would take out potential participants from the Royal Rumble, so there is that trade off there. But there's my that's my SmackDown recap. So back to you.
All right, well, let's now move on to this week's Raw. And the first highlight I wanted to get into is the what I felt was a stellar Intercontinental Championship match between The Miz and Gunther. And I just wanted to quickly sort of remark on some of the elements to it that I really enjoyed. Firstly, I really liked the injury to Gunther's right hand, which is obviously his preferred chopping hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that little addition with the Miz targeting it after it got injured. Obviously, there were spots like Gunther's missile drop kick and then power bomb, which got him a two. And he sort of quickly turned it into a Boston Crab, which obviously that was the move that he used to finish off the Miz in their previous encounter. So there was a bit of tension there. The Miz did manage to evade it this time, getting to the bottom rope. He actually got another close fall with the skull crushing finale, and that got him a two. And then he hit another skull crushing finale, but this one from the second rope. And I think for a lot of people, there was that little bit of doubt in the back of their minds, thinking, "Oh no, is this going to be it?" So I thought that was a really nice false finish. Gunther was managed to power out and kick out at two from that, and then he sort of manufactured some momentum, sort of put away the pain from his right hand and managed to deliver a power bomb, a clothesline, and then another power bomb for good measure to retain the title. But I thought this was a really captivating TV match, and to have it within the first hour, I thought also helped just add a little bit more to Raw this week. How did you feel?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, it's always good to get that kind of wrestling content on the show. And I think I mean, I've said it before, but it really proves the idea that The Miz actually is a very good and a very capable wrestler. His only weakness is that he can't lead. So that's why he's failed. He failed in the main event of WrestleMania with John Cena because John Cena can't lead either. So to be in the ring with the ring general who can lead, it just shows you what a beautiful dance they can dance.
It's also worth mentioning that there were two other title matches on this week's Raw, in addition to the IC Championship, and that was the Judgment Day defending successfully their titles against the Creed brothers in what was another good showing, I think, from the two tag teams. And then there was also the title match between Kaden Carter and Katana Chance versus Piper Niven and Chelsea Green for the women's tag team championship. And the two baby faces actually won the titles off of Chelsea Green and Piper Niven. So fair play to them. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, look, it was a bit of a surprise, but it does show that, it's that idea that anything can happen, and it's a nice little end of the year boost, I think, for the fans. Get a baby face pop in the crowd.
And it's always nice to see a legitimate tag team actually win the straps.
Oh, yes.
All right. Well, the other thing I just wanted to quickly
If
remark
if
on.
I can just point up here that I do think they are going to be transitional champions when the Kabuki Warriors defeat them.
Oh,
I do believe that.
yeah, probably. But,
Yeah,
we'll see how that transpires.
that's right.
I do quickly want to remark as well on the interaction between Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre this week. And it was interesting to me because Drew came out and he opened up saying he's actually proud of Seth for telling the truth to Punk last week, which I thought was very interesting. And it's keeping in character, I guess. These two seem to be the vocal minority on Raw that are outwardly sort of against Punk and what and his presence in the company, which I think is gonna add a good extra layer potentially down the line. And then he also talked about how, he's talking about sacrifices and all the sacrifices he's had to make, all the family time that he's had to miss, being away from his family in the UK to chase the dream in America, in WWE. And he says to Seth, like, I need your title. And then Seth sort of followed it up with sort of sort of targeting Drew against for his antics before. And he said to him at one point, "When I look into your eyes, I don't hate you, I pity you." Um, what did you think of this interaction, Fancy? Obviously, they've had a rivalry sort of brewing for the past month or so. How did you think this played into that ongoing rivalry?
Look, I think it was a little bit like the way they were going into it. It feels like a mini feud build up, if you will, because they are going to have a face off in the new year. So it did feel like kind of that let's get pumped, let's get hyped sort of promo style. I think that was the vibe that I was getting from this one, and they certainly were both being able to keep up. I think I would have liked to see a bit more of Seth saying that he can see right through Drew, and he's like, I know that deep down you're just an aggressive ass, basically, as opposed to the motivated Drew McIntyre, the keen to succeed Drew McIntyre, who might be portraying himself as a family man, but I think he's a bit more aggressive deep down, and I want to see that aggression come to the fore.
Well, hopefully in a couple of weeks we'll see it because he and Seth are set for a World Heavyweight Championship match at the day one edition of Raw. So we'll see how that goes. All right, well, thanks. On that note, let's move on to AEW. And we'll start the AEW discussion with what happened on Collision. So I throw it back to you.
Well, Collision opened up with, as they've been doing quite frequently, and that is with a Continental Classic group stage match between Andrade and Claudio. And what I saw in this match was the best looking code red off the top turnbuckle that I've ever seen, performed by Andrade. Claudio had some good offense of his own. He hit a suplex, which was immediately countered with two of the three amigos. But in the end, Claudio did obtain the 3 points with an unseen low blow, followed by a neutralizer. Later on in the show, Abaddon defeated a jobber and then brawled with Julia Hart. And that was including a Sky Blue participation and the returning Thunder Rosa, who's back in ring next week. Orange Cassidy took on Brian Keith, and the champ retained in a nice little scrappy kind of contest. FTR had an in-ring promo challenging the House of Black. We got a Texas street fight between Willow Nightingale, Chris Statlander, and their opponents, Diamante and Mercedes Martinez. And the heels drove the face of Chris Statlander into a pool of tacks and broken glass, and then hit her with an ace of spades into it. And as if that wasn't enough, they put Willow through the table with a power bomb on the outside as well, but somehow the faces were ultimately able to prevail. This was a a treat of a match, I would say, for television. Later on, Brian Cage won a squash match. And then further on to this one, again into Continental Classic, Eddie Kingston needed two back fists to defeat the dancing Danny Garcia and knock him mathematically out from the qualification to the next round. And then in the main event, Bryan Danielson took on Brody King. Bryan did have to push hard to get the psycho knee, but he did manage to put away Brody. And where I'm leading this conversation is looking at these three group stage matches that have occurred. It leaves us in an interesting position because, as you will outline with us, the possibility of ties in the gold group did eventuate. And I want to outline some possible tie situations that might be occurring in the blue group, in the blue league. So currently we have Andrade and Bryan Danielson with 9 points each. Brody, Eddie, and Claudio have 6 points each, so they are still in the running. Garcia is the only one eliminated. Now, in these final group stage matches, if Andrade or Bryan Danielson or both of them win, they guarantee their spot in the semis. So their fate is in their own hands. Contrastingly, Brody King, Eddie Kingston, and Claudio Castagnoli must win and then hope that the tiebreaker goes in their favor. Let me clarify a little bit here. So in a world where Andrade defeats Eddie Kingston, as an example, if Bryan wins, then they're both through. That's fine. But if Claudio defeats Bryan, then we have a two-way tie for second place between Bryan and Claudio, in which Claudio would get through by virtue of head-to-head. The issue in this situation is if Brody King wins as well, because then we have a three-way tie for second place, which means, what do we have, like a fatal four-way in the semi-final? That's not it. That's not it. Let me keep going with this. Suppose on the other side, suppose that Bryan defeats Claudio, right, at the top of the show or something like that. Again, if Andrade wins, those two go through. However, if Garcia wins and Andrade loses, then that means that Eddie has kind of pushed into the running and there's going to be a two-way tie resolved by Eddie going through. Again, if Brody were to win, however, then there would be a three-way tie. Eddie Kingston, Andrade, and Brody King would have a three-way tie. So we've got a lot of possibilities here. Now, before I go into the end, we actually have the possibility of a five-way tie for first / second / third, fourth, fifth.
You're kidding, Thanasi.
We actually have that possibility. So remember how I said that at the moment, Andrade has 9, Bryan Danielson has 9, Brody has 6, so he can go up to 9 as well if he defeats Danny Garcia. Eddie has 6. He can go up to 9 if he defeats if he defeats Andrade. And Claudio can also go up to 9 if he defeats Bryan Danielson. And the issue here is, if looking for some kind of a tiebreaker, hoping for some kind of a tiebreaker, we just delete all the Garcia matches out because everyone defeated him. These guys have all gone 2-2 against each other, the remaining 5 guys. Now, that being said, I'm anticipating that there's going to be some kind of a draw. I think that we're going to have a draw, a time limit draw, perhaps in the last of the 3 matches. I'm not sure which of these they're going to structure to have first, but I think that in order to keep the tension high, you've got to have at least like an opening contest sort of situation where it's either the Bryan versus Claudio match and then Claudio wins to kind of create that, ooh, what if? Or same deal with Andrade versus Eddie, where Eddie should win and then create that tension as well. But that's something that I wanted to raise, and I don't know if you got any feedback there, but I did just want to outline all those mathematical possibilities for our listeners on the show.
Well, I'll tell you what my thoughts are on that. It If we're talking about a real sports presentation, this stuff can happen.
Mm,
It becomes interesting, and it's not like outside the realm of believability either. So I quite enjoy that. The thing that is unfortunate though is that you start booking yourself into really weird corners as to how to resolve these tiebreakers.
yep.
Um, so I'm going to get into it with Dynamite soon, but there it was in the Gold League. It's a triple tie for first, so they've just turned the semi-final match into a three-way,
Yep.
which is fine. But to me, it feels like that was a solution born out of not wanting to repeat any of those singles matches, and they just decided to make it a three-way. Whereas, and this is something you have raised that I completely agree with, what should have happened is just the winner of the Gold League faced the runner-up of the Blue League. So you didn't
Mhm.
have to worry about that.
I
But
actually thought where they were going to go with it was that Jay White would not go through to the semifinals, that it would be Mox versus Swerve, and Swerve would get his revenge back in the semis, avenging his loss from the group stage. And then I thought he was going to go on to win the Continental Classic. So that's where I thought that was going. Um, Obviously, the booking went a different way. But yeah, I think we should just have more tiebreakers, basically. Like the head to head, that's a good first tiebreaker. I agree with that. But the second one, I think, should be time. Like, how long does it take you to win? And how long can you last if you're going to lose?
that's
That's
my
my thought.
favorite. That's my favorite because it also adds in that extra element of like you've actually got to try and beat your opponents, not just have a nice dance with them.
Yeah.
Like it just makes it feel a bit more like more stakes. I quite like that as a tiebreaker. All right, well, there's plenty of Continental Classic action on Dynamite as well, so let's go into it. And it wasn't my first highlight, but I might as well talk about it since we're on the subject. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Jay White Jon Moxley match and the ramifications of it. So Jay White managed to win, and during the match, Jon Moxley injured his left knee, and that was the limb that Jay White decided to target during the match and sort of to regain control and uh, get the ascendancy. And there was a moment, the sort of the running theme of the match also was Jay White trying to hit his Blade Runner and failing. So there was a moment where he tried to hit his Blade Runner and that got reversed into a paradigm shift. There was another time that he tried to hit the Blade Runner that just got countered. And there was a moment when Moxley even hit the stomp, which he's appropriated from his good friend Seth frickin' Rollins. Uh, but finally, when Jay White does hit the Blade Runner, he gets the win. And I really, really like when finishers finish the match. Just the one, because that's all you need, and you just end it right there, because it always makes it seem like it's a menacing move. How did you feel about that?
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. I thought that was the exact way that you should be finishing a match. I wasn't sure that it was quite the right booking decision, though, purely because it did create this kind of three-way tie situation. I think it just convoluted it a little bit. But nevertheless, look, it was a good TV match. I couldn't fault the wrestling of it. It was very impressive.
I'll tell you what, for me, it reeks of trying to protect Jay White, who was the last contender for the world title,
Yes, yes.
and not have him finish third in a group of five fellow competitors. So
And at some point on this show, so listeners do stay tuned. We are going to try to combat that issue where basically we're going to try to create a situation through fantasy booking of it's okay to come third because you're going to get some kind of a reward out of it. But not to spoil too much of what's in store for us.
the other highlight I wanted to talk about is what went on with MJF and Samoa Joe on the show. So Samoa Joe came out and said that Roddy Strong, he's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, but he may have been right that MJF staged his attack from the devil, and so asks the world champion to come out. MJF comes out, he sort of turns the accusation around on Joe, and the two tease a physical altercation when some masked men come out, or as I like to say, some hired goons. The lights go out, the devil appears on the Titantron, and then we get some text that reads, "Where can you go? Who can you trust? Next week, will you accept a challenge for the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Championships? Are you a hero, Max?" This is the latest uh, entry into the ongoing Devil Masked Man saga. Did this hit any better than the previous for you, Thanasi, or does it feel a bit more of the same?
Look, it did feel more of the same, to be quite honest with you. I think I would like to see a little bit more variation or just to find out exactly where we're heading here. Sometimes it's good to know what the next step is. Because they had teased it the previous week before MJF got knocked out. So how do we know that this one's actually going to be the real match this time? You know what I mean? It's kind of like we've already seen this part, so to speak.
The only thing I'll add is I truly think the way they're going, that the reveal will happen at World's End. It just feels like it's the right time. It's the end of the year, and you go straight into 2024 thinking, what is the possibility? And hopefully it's a satisfying reveal.
Oh, I hope so. And you know something, I was watching recently. Uh, I haven't finished it yet, but it's an AEW timeline on YouTube. And on that, I was watching the MJF or the history of MJF's record-breaking reign. It's like a 5-hour video. And featuring in that is the Four Pillars match from earlier this year. And during the entrance of Jungle Boy, they said that Jungle Boy prophesied that he would have AEW gold around his waist by the end of 2023. To date, I don't think that's been fulfilled after what happened at All In. So wouldn't it be apropos for him to fulfill the prophecy on the very, very last day of AEW programming by coming out of nowhere, swerving us all, having an impromptu world title match, being revealed as the masked man, the devil, and then leaving up in arms what's going to happen with the bidding war of 2024.
I would be intrigued to see it play out. Obviously, Jungle Boy might not be everyone's favorite to dethrone MJF, but you got to keep your options open at this stage, especially with MJF reinforcing supposedly that he hasn't re-signed at all with AEW. Now, obviously, we can choose whether or not to believe that, but the fact remains that at least publicly, that has been the same message spread ever since I think 2021 or 2022 when he started saying it, maybe even earlier.
I believe so.
So there you go. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. Next week's going to be the Go Home Dynamite episode before World's End. So hopefully we'll get a bit more information or a tease, and we can start speculating even further in the next week. Well, Thanasi, at World's End sort of marks the end of 2023, which is fast approaching. And I thought it would be a good time to reflect on the year that's been. And I thought the best way to do that is to break it down into categories as for us to sort of discuss what we think have been some of the highlights of 2023.
Okay, let's do it.
So the first category I've got here is most improved wrestler of the year. And I've got a couple options that I just want to throw out there. And I think the first one you'll sort of agree with, Dominic Mysterio.
Certainly. Certainly. I would definitely agree with him. I mean, the bloke can't get words out on his promo now. Certainly, he leans into it now. But when it began, it was so organic that everyone just loved it. It was almost like a Pavlovian response. Like you see Dominic raising his microphone to his mouth and you start booing. It's fantastic. It really, really is.
Another option I've got here, and it's one that's come out in the last couple months especially, Julia Hart. I think that she's really come into her own ever since joining the House of Black, and I think especially in the last couple of months, her character has really developed.
It has, and I mean, she had that long winning streak as well, leading up to her first shot at the TBS Championship. She didn't win it on that occasion, so I think that, I don't think that actually stalled her momentum all that much. Like we really saw that, yeah, she's able to keep up. So of course, I mean, not all those victories were against high-profile opponents, but nevertheless, a winning streak is a winning streak regardless. So yeah, I think that's a good shout.
I've got one more name here, and it's not my favorite, which is why I left it last in this case. But I think there's certainly a case to be made. This man, at the beginning of the year, wrestled in a 4-minute sponsorship match at the Royal Rumble, and he's finishing it as probably one of the most over and popular wrestlers in wrestling, and that is L.A. Knight. Yeah.
I would definitely accept that point. I mean, we knew the potential with LA Knight beforehand, right? This is more just tapping into that potential. But yeah, no, I do agree with you. I think that he is a well improved wrestler for the year. Can I make a couple of suggestions of my own?
Please do.
I think we can't look past Tony Storm. If you look at the character progression that she's had, especially her downfall after losing the women's world title the first time this year, on the, I think it was the Dynamite 200 episode where she went down to Hikaru Shida,
Yep.
and it kind of just created like a downward spiral for her, and then leading into All in the UK, where that character just kind of like descended into madness after the betrayal with Soraya, and then all the backstage vignettes. I just think it's been absolutely fantastic. And look at her now; she's world champion again, twice in the same year. So she's really reclaimed that spot, and she's going to very likely end the year as number one.
Can't disagree with that. I think I agree with every point that you've just made.
And I've got a bit of a dark horse one for you as well. And there's a reason for it. This probably won't top the list, but I think it's relevant. The Guns. If you
Mm,
think about where they were, especially last year, but then coming into the new year, there wasn't really much there. But I think since joining um, the Bullet Club Gold, it's really been vibes of Jay White and Juice Robinson were like the Shawn Michaels and the Triple H of the original DX.
yeah.
And then we've got the introduction of the New Age Outlaws here, right? And yes, it's a coincidence that one of the New Age Outlaws is their father. But I really do get those vibes there, and it's just made them really stand out as part of that faction. It would have been nice if they had actually won tag gold. I think that that would have really cemented it. But I think that they're worth a mention.
All right. Well, fancy. I'm gonna pick from my list the one that I think's the most deserving, and then I want you to pick from those two options who you think's the most deserving, and then
Mm-hmm.
we'll just quickly have a discussion and see who's more inclined to the other's option. So we don't want to make this too much of a 5-minute discussion or anything, but to add to it, I think Dominic Mysterio is probably my shout for the three options that I provided.
Well, you can't see it because you're on the other side of the line, but I actually had written down three names. The Guns and Tony Storm were two, but Dominic was also at the top of my list. So it's
Uh,
going to be a very short discussion here. We just happen to agree.
Okay, well, perfect. Dominic Mysterio, well done, my friend.
Yes.
All right, so from most improved, we're going to move on to most underrated wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And here I've got a couple options myself. I think one who's probably starting to get the attention he deserves is Swerve Strickland.
Mm.
I think that he's a guy that I started really vibing with when near the end of his time with Keith Lee and starting to see exactly what he's about. And I think that he puts on great matches, and since Hangman, I think there's a case to be made. He's gotten more popular, and he's starting to get the attention that he deserves. But I think he's someone that has filled this bill. A couple of other options I have from AEW is Juice Robinson and Ricky Starks.
Hmm. I think the idea of someone being underrated with Juice Robinson, that really resonates with me. I certainly think that because he's there as kind of, he plays the role of a second in command, that he kind of can get overlooked. But he's so good as a heel. Like he
He,
just really, really vibes well with the gimmick that he's created. And he's got that kind of annoyance that you like being annoyed by, if that
mm,
makes sense. It's not go away heat. It's I love to boo you heat. And if I can just throw a couple other names in here, and on the AEW point, I would say Andrade.
mhm.
I think that especially pre-collision, we were looking at him as someone who was just completely being neglected by AEW, probably like a booking decision, and maybe perhaps was not thought of in the same light that we know that he could be because we've seen how good he is on NXT. But I certainly think he would be one name. And I'd also like to throw out a veteran name here, Natalia. She's been around for very, very long. Was a reliable number one contender as well when they needed her, when she needed to back in for, I think it was on the house show circuit, on the international circuit with Becky Lynch being out injured. And she just subbed in very quickly to be a good sparring partner for Rhea Ripley, and then got her reward on TV by actually getting a championship match. So those are the names that I would like to add into the mix.
All right, beautiful. All right. Of these options, then I see which one immediately do you think that's they fill this category perfectly for this year?
For me personally, I think that the best performance of everyone that both of us have outlined, the best performance of the year is Swerve. However, based on where he's reached now towards the end of the year and he is reaching the main event, I don't think underrated describes him. I think rated is how I would describe him. So I'm going to select Juice Robinson for my part.
Okay, well, I'm happy to support that selection. Juice Robinson, as you pointed out, is very much a guy that he's presented as the second in command of his own group, and yet still stands out as much as anyone. And coincidentally, we've been talking about Bullet Club Gold a lot. I'm actually wearing a Bullet Club
Uh,
Gold shirt, the first time as well since purchasing it. And the main reason I got it is because of these guys and what they've done this year. So, Juice Robinson, congratulations, you're our most underrated wrestler for the year. Moving on, from most underrated, we go to most overrated wrestler. Thanasi, who are some candidates you have for this category?
I'd like to name one that I always list under such a category, and that would be one John Cena for his appearances this year. I think that, well, we don't have to say too much about it, but you saw how he went at WrestleMania. Didn't really do very much at all. Didn't put in a lot of effort either. So he's one name that I would like to throw in. Of course, Roman as well. His appearances have been lacking, I think. So when he shows up, yes, he's a good wrestler. Yes, he's an excellent character, but I just haven't seen enough of the world champion this year to warrant exactly his level. And the third one that I want to say, it actually makes me sad. And you're probably going to disagree with this, and that's completely fine. But I want to say Damian Priest because I feel like we've plateaued a little bit. We were looking at his real growth, seeing him as a main eventer for a great deal of the year, but we haven't really strapped a rocket to him. And I'm starting to get scared that when he does get the world title, he may not look as credible as we want him to look. So this one is a sadder sort of name that I'm putting out there. I don't want him to be, I don't want to feel this way, if I can put it like that. But do you have any reactions or other names to suggest?
Well, I'll take it one by one. John Cena, look, I understand, but the guy's wrestled on like two or three pay-per-views, and he's not really taken up time, and he's lost two of those pay-per-views. So I'm gonna be nice to good old John for this year. Damien Priest is an interesting one. I don't know that I'd classify it as overrated though, because overrated would suggest that he's not uh that they present him as a bigger deal and he's given more time than what he deserves. And I don't think that's the case. I think the issue is, like you said, is that they're not they're making him eat the fall at War Games as the champion, as the leader of the match, and as the Money in the Bank briefcase holder. So I think it's a case of that he's been put into status quo since winning that briefcase instead of being sort of slowly elevated into a really big menace. Roman Reigns, not only do I agree with, he was the only guy I had on the list, and in other years, this would have been one of absolute uh, annoyance. But this one's purely, like you said, is that we don't get enough of him.
Mm.
And I
It,
think
it,
that's
it, it's for a completely different reason to where, because he's made most overrated lists before, but for a totally different reason than for this one, right? So this is actually kind of disappointing. Not sad, but disappointing.
a couple of years ago, if we were on doing this show, I would have argued he's the best wrestler of the year based on what he was doing and how frequently he was on. But yeah, that's Roman. We need a bit of a refresh. I think we wouldn't be saying this if he wasn't the world champion either.
Mm.
I think it's the fact he's holding those titles is kind of hostage at this point is why we feel this way.
Agreed.
So we'll make Roman the most overrated wrestler of the year.
Roman it is.
The next I've got on the list is biggest surprise of the year. And quite frankly, I think there is only one option here. Then I say, are we in agreement here?
I think we're in agreement, but let's just do a bit of a slow build up to it, right? I think before November of this year, I would have had two other candidates to put on this list. One is the debut of Adam Copeland in AEW, right? That was a big shock. We saw it coming not in a way that you would think, right? It wasn't a badly kept secret. It was almost more like the fans want it so much that we kind of just have to give in, right? But that was a fantastic moment, just absolutely brilliant. The other one that I'm going to say, it's actually not even a kayfabe one. It's the merger between WWE and UFC. I think that was a very big deal. And the main thing that made it a shock is that they managed to keep it under wraps and announce it the night after or the day after WrestleMania, which means that they actually did quite well in keeping it secret. But yes, those are my two. And I think the one that you're going to say is my number one and my third, but top of the list. Do you want to spill the beans?
CM Punk. Honestly, like CM Punk showing up in WWE is a historic moment, and it's something that I genuinely think the majority of wrestling fans never really thought would ever happen, especially when he came back to AEW. Kind of felt like, okay, that's gonna be his place, and he's just gonna make a home of it. And quite frankly, I always wanted him to go back to WWE just because it is the biggest brand. It's got the most exposure. You've got talent there that you just really felt like it would be good to see that box office matchup. And I I think this one genuinely surprised me even more than his AEW debut, purely because with AEW it felt like a fresh environment, a fresh management that maybe, he would be enticed to it. The fact that he did go back to WWE, he sort of, at least temporarily, repaired the damaged relationship between himself and Triple H. It just feels like this was the biggest holy shit moment, potentially in wrestling ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you. Because I mean, like, it was the exact opposite approach to his AEW debut, if you recall, right? That one was a very, very badly kept secret, which in the age of social media was genius.
Yeah.
It was like, don't even try to hide it, and just build it up and sell out an arena on the rumor that he's going to appear. Here, they actually had a fantastic pay-per-view. They had another massive return in Randy Orton and excellent matches, like a great card. It was in CM Punk's hometown, and by the end, people had forgotten. But they managed to bring it out, and it was just a perfect way to close an excellent pay-per-view.
All right, well, I think it's fair to say CM Punk, returning to WWE, biggest surprise of the year, no doubt. And on from that, we're gonna move on to our next category. And this one I deliberately kept from you, Thanos, here. So I gave you the other ones so that you could sort of prepare, but this one I decided it would be funnier to share with you on live, and that is funniest moment of the year. And
Ah,
and I only have one nomination for this, but I think you'll wholeheartedly agree with it, and that is
yes.
Brock Lesnar beating down on Cody Rhodes on Raw, saying that he wants a fight.
And not only does he want a fight, he also wants Cody and the audience to look at this face. I can't express how much I was laughing when I watched this because I made a point of bringing up the clip and saying to you with a straight face, just sit down and watch this. And you can see from Brock's expression when he goes all falsetto that it's the most unintentionally hilarious thing. And that's one of the funniest things you can pull off in wrestling, frankly. That can actually make you laugh.
It's,
Um,
it's,
but you agree. I think you and I are in agreement on this one.
oh. I mean, that wasn't even going to be a question for me. Like, even if you wanted to suggest something else, I couldn't accept it. That was too good. Okay, well, let's get back on track a little bit. And this one I've got as next in line is a category Best Weekly Wrestling Show. Now, obviously, there are only four really that we pay attention to really settle for this. So I'm going to throw to you of those four, which is Raw, SmackDown, Collision, and Dynamite. What has been your favorite, or at least what you believe is the best of the year?
I'm going to give you my personal preference. And I think that everyone in the comments should actually give their own personal preference and their logic. But this is how I'm going to put it. I think between commencement and departure of CM Punk, that Collision was the best show. I think it was the best product that was being offered. Since then, I feel like it's just become a bit of a drop off, and it's not quite where it was before. And therefore, by default, I think following that the best show has been Dynamite as the flagship show of AEW. And why do I say that? Because you know that I have a particular enjoyment for these kinds of simple and lean products where a great deal of the show is wrestling or in ring segments. And I think that it's exacerbated by a 3 hour show on Raw, but even with SmackDown, that a great deal of the content that you're watching is the ads and then internal ads as well, of like your WWEshop.com or your match flow recap, which is just highlights from the previous week. And there are often times, especially on SmackDown, this happens when I watch and when I review SmackDown, we'll return from a commercial, have a brief backstage segment, go to this match flow thing, which is just replays from last week, have an entrance, and then go into the next commercial break. So we've had no in-ring action between ad breaks. So I think that the AEW product is a lot leaner, and I find that much more enjoyable personally. What about you? Because this is genuinely a preference thing.
I'll tell you where I'm at. So I completely agree with what you said before. Like, of any one time, Collision with Punk was my favorite program to watch because I felt like it was a good mix of what I like, which is wrestling, but building up stakes for the wrestling. And it felt, and also in an engaging way, because it's okay to have stakes, but you actually have to be invested in those stakes. It's not just a matter of saying it's important. And I felt like that was the best. I also agree with what you said, which is I do default to Dynamite because Dynamite on when we average it out over the year has more interesting things going on the weekly programming with its developing storylines. It's the flagship show. It's easy to consume as a 2 hour product compared to Raw, which is
Indeed.
three.
Indeed.
And for that reason, that is also my pick for best weekly wrestling show. But I want to preface this by saying, in my opinion, Dynamite is starting to decline a bit, and I hope it comes back up. But I think especially in the last sort of month or two, it's starting to feel a bit like the great segments are few and far between.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah.
And when that happens, and you've got Raw and SmackDown, which are still sometimes sort of boring shows to watch, but there are so many things going on where you feel like, oh, for Raw, oh, I'm hyped up for the Seth segment. I'm hyped up for the Jey Uso segment. I'm hyped up for the Sami Zayn segment. I'm hyped up for the CM Punk segment.
Hmm.
I'm interested by what Nakamura's video is going to be. I'm interested about what Drew McIntyre is going to do next. Like, it feels like they're starting to build up where it's like, it'll be formulaic, but all of these wrestlers are going to have their own engagement when you're watching. So I've just got,
Yep.
so it's Dynamite, you're winning, but let's pick it up next year as well. Let's get back on track. All right, next I've got most valued champion, which is essentially who has been the best champion. And there are plenty of options that, Thanasi, I'm going to let you give your list first. For me personally, there is only really one winner, but I do want to hear your thoughts.
Look, I've only got two on my list, to be frank. One of them is Eddie Kingston. I think his victory in taking the ROH title and then also becoming the NJPW strong open weight champion, and becoming that real fighting champion. I think he's really shown that excellent gritty side, always really willing to put up a fight. But certainly the standout goes with that, like beyond a shadow of a doubt, is Christian Cage with the TNT title. I think he's my standout champion for the year. He's used that belt to rejuvenate himself, and I think that that actually is my most valuable champion.
That's really interesting. I didn't have Christian Cage down, but now that you've said it, I kind of agree.
Hmm.
But I will say my one shout was well, actually, I'll give a notable mention to Orange Cassidy as the international champion.
Okay.
I'm not a biggest fan of his matches, but you got to respect the grind that he's gone into in
Yep.
defending that title. And he's, for a lot of fans, he's made it mean something, which is impressive. But the one I had was Gunther as the IC
Yep.
champion. I think that he has produced probably 8 of the best 10 matches of WWE for the
Huh.
year, probably just on his own back.
Yep.
And there's no denying that much as Christian Cage has made the TNT Championship mean something, Gunther has made the IC Championship feel like an impressive accolade again. So the big question here, Panas, is which one of us is going to relent first?
Look, I think that I accept your point because basically, if I remember correctly, and I've done my maths right, and I think I have, Gunther is going to have had this belt from the new year to the end of the year as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's got to count for a lot and all these banger matches. So I'm gonna relent and give it to Gunther.
Okay. But Christian Cage, you're very close. Keep at it. The next one I've got, and this was actually a bit tough for me to actually really think about the ones that I felt truly embrace this, and that is best feud of the year. For this one, I have one shout that I really feel strongly about, but there are all plenty of options, so I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm throwing it out: Rey Mysterio versus Dominic Mysterio as best feud of the year.
Okay, I would not have thought that one. Yes, it's a good one. It is a good one. Um, I think he was a little bit constrained for time, but yes, okay, yeah. I'll take that. Do you have any others?
Well, I've got a big one, but I want to wait to hear what yours are because I want to see because if ours aligned here, then I think we've got our natural
Well, I've got
winner.
three. I've got three. On the AEW side, I feel like I can't look past Adam Cole and MJF.
Mhm.
Like that whole angle, going from bitter enemies, standing off, and then being forced to tag together, and then eventually, in the most bromantic way, falling in love with each other, leading up to that beautiful moment of Adam Cole raising the arm of MJF as well at All In. I thought that that was just like a fabulous, fabulous storytelling, and there's more to it That's the thing. Like we know that it's going to get even better because this is not the end. Like it's still having its slow burn. I'd also like to mention Jey Uso and Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
I think that was a very, very strong storyline. Could have done better, but not much better at all, right? Because the only thing that we could have done better was actually have stakes for Jey to become world champion, and just contextually, we didn't have that advantage, which means that the one that I rank slightly ahead of this is Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens against the Bloodline. I think that one was really, really strong. Yes, part of that storyline started last year, but that doesn't take it away because the climax of it happened in the main event of WrestleMania, where we had the tag straps being defended. You had the Usos, who really rejuvenated their career when they turned heel in 2017, getting to the main event of WrestleMania. You had people like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, who, they're the indie guys, they're the internet darlings. They've gotten to the main event of WrestleMania. And it was all on the back of just a fabulous storyline that had all these brilliant emotional turns. Those are my three nominations. On top of your fourth one, do you have any others that you want to outline?
I wish I could, but you covered them.
Uh,
I had as my third MJF versus Adam Cole. And purely the only reason it was in third is because I felt like there's more to it. But second, I had Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens versus the Bloodline, verbatim. So, and I thought that was a fantastic one. And you are right, it had the best payoff it could have had, in my opinion. So I'm actually just immediately happy to give it to that because I think that was a fantastic
well,
feud.
we agree. Let's do it.
All right, beautiful. Well, next we've got best match of the year. Again, I've got multiple candidates here, obviously.
I do as well. So shall we perhaps just list out instead of discussing them in too much depth? Because I've
Yep.
got like 3 lines worth
Okay,
personally.
okay, you go first.
Let me go first. Okay. In no particular order, I've got the Texas Death Match between Swerve Strickland and Hangman Adam Page. I've got the Adam Cole versus MJF at Wembley, not the time limit draw, the Wembley one for the storytelling.
Mhm.
I've got Bloodline Civil War, the tag match at Money in the Bank. The Usos versus Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens in the main event of WrestleMania Night 1.
Mhm.
The Intercontinental Championship triple threat at WrestleMania. The Four Pillars match from AEW at Double or
Oh,
Nothing, I
okay.
believe it was.
Double nothing, yeah.
Danielson versus Okada. And this is the only TV match that I've got. The 1 hour FTR versus Bullet Club Gold.
Yeah.
I thought that was something definitely worth mentioning, even if we're not going to put it to win. I've got the Iron Man match from Revolution between Brian Danielson and MJF. And then finally at Forbidden Door, Kenny Omega versus William Ospreay. Those are my matches. So the real question is, what are yours?
Well, you named the majority of them except for one. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to add in that extra one, and that is Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair
Oh
at
yes,
WrestleMania 39,
yeah.
which I thought was a stellar performance from both of them. And I mean, we're spoiled for choice here.
It's been a good year, right? Like the
It
fact that we've
has
got so
been.
many options is excellent.
Uh, Look, I'll be real. When I thought about this, the first thing that came to mind was the Iron Man match at Revolution between MJF and Bryan Danielson.
Oh, okay.
So just for the sake of speeding things along, I'll make that my candidate
Mm-hmm.
for the Ultimate Showdown. Of your list,
My list.
what's the one that you really felt like that stood out to me?
Oh, I think for me it's a tie between the Adam Cole MJF at Wembley
Yep.
and the Usos Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens match,
Okay.
because these were culminations. They were local peaks of particular storylines, and when you combine good wrestling and good storytelling, because the Adam Cole MJF one, that was a little bit of a spot fest, but it was heavily a story dictated contest. And I enjoyed that, right? We went on an emotional ride. Likewise for the Usos and Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. But the thing is, they pulled off an excellent match at a Big Four pay-per-view, which does not always happen. The Big Four are generally for moments, not so much for matches. And this is one where they actually were able to do that. And on the same card as the IC triple threat. So that's my draw.
In the interest of speeding things along, I'm just going to tell you that Adam Cole versus MJF at All In was in my top three.
All right. Well then,
So for the sake
I
of
think we agree.
mathematics, I think we'll give it to that because I agreed. I loved it because of the storytelling,
Hmm.
not just the spots. I thought it was fantastic. All right. Well, next up we've got best pay-per-view or if you're from WWE premium live event of the year, and we had some good ones this year. I'm not gonna lie. But I've narrowed down my choices to two, for somewhat similar reasons, actually. But what are the ones that stood out to you, Thanasis?
Well, I've got four, so maybe if you name your two, and I'll fill any gaps.
Okay. Well, my first one is probably a rogue shout for many, but it is Survivor Series War Games. And it's because of the excitement, the dual returns of Randy Orton and CM Punk, I think made people orgasm, to be frank. And I thought that it was one of those shows where it was structured well as well, well
Hmm.
paced. You had things speed along. Some like the finish of the men's War Games match was kind of simplistic. Randy came in, cleaned house, it was done. But I just thought that from the fan engagement, it really just elevated it to 11.
And also, don't you love 3 hour pay-per-views?
Oh,
They are the original. That is the perfect duration for a main roster pay-per-view. I remember when we used to watch takeovers and they were like 2.25 hours, 2.5 hours. For that product, that was peak.
yeah.
Like that is an excellent time. And I know on the main roster, you're not going to have that sort of a duration. It's going to be rounded to the nearest hour, or at least to the nearest half hour minimum. But certainly like the 3 hour pay-per-view for a main roster pay-per-view, just the best.
The other one I had, and it's similarly about the way the fans made it, as well as the actual quality of the matches, and that is AEW All In London. This was before Survivor Series War Games. This was the one that really made me think, my God, the importance of fans at a show and the way they can elevate everything that goes on. So that was the other one that I had. We mentioned matches from that show that elevated. We got Adam Cole versus MJF from it as our best match to give it just to give it even just a minor taste of just how good it was.
I think just the mere what it represents about like what wrestling can achieve and how big wrestling can be, because this is the secondary promotion in the English speaking world. So I think that was really, really impressive. And I agree with your point. Both of those pay-per-views were on my list of four as well. So what I'll add on as well is Forbidden Door,
Yeah.
because last year I think they had a bit of a hard time with injuries and stuff, which was unfortunate, but they stuck through with it and pulled off some really, really great matches, like the Osprey and Omega match, Danielson Okada match. We got some really good dream contests. And the other one I want to throw into the mix is WrestleMania Saturday,
The night
the,
one.
the night one.
Yeah.
And I'm separating that from night two specifically because I think night one had all the real standout, and I think they were described as the Triple H matches, in contrast to the Vince matches on night two, especially with booking decisions. But yeah, so those are the four. So your two do coincide with my two. So I'm gonna narrow it down and say, what do you want to do between Survivor Series and All In?
I'm torn because there was one that I think had uh the better matches, albeit there were more matches to select from, but the other one had the biggest moment for me. And I'm trying to differentiate between the two. And I think going against my absolute love for CM Punk, I'm going to give it to what I felt was all round the Supreme show. And I'm going
Yeah,
to give it to All In.
I think I'm going to agree with you there. So we're going to be quite satisfied with what we're going to put as best pay-per-view of this year.
All right, well, that takes us into the main event of our review of 2023, and that is the MVP Wrestler of the Year. And there are plenty of options to pick from, and there are different reasons that we could have for picking them. But I'm gonna give you a short list of 4 names that I'm giving it to, and they are Gunther, Samoa Joe, Bryan Danielson, and MJF. For different reasons. For Gunther and MJF, it's purely and Samoa Joe to an extent as well. It's about what they've been able to do is basically lead the majority of the year as a champion and have the matches that go along with it. And for Bryan Danielson, it's purely based on because whoever he's been with this year, he's pulled off match of the night after match of the night after match of the night. He's shown that he really is one of the best working wrestlers in this generation.
I have nothing to disagree with on those points. Of the 4 that you named, I actually neglected to have Bryan Danielson on my list. But nevertheless, I actually am surprised that you said Samoa Joe as well, because I actually had him there thinking that he'd be a bit more of a dark horse. But just like that career resurgence that he had when he signed with AEW, and when he was the king of television, had both the TNT strap and the ROH World Television belt. He's just really shown exactly his level. And I think especially as number 1 contender, he's really shown, both against MJF and against Punk, shown his level, even at his age, of what he is capable of doing. And I think AEW have just kind of like been vindicated of their decision to sign him.
Yeah.
2 names that I had on my list that you haven't said. Did you say Cody Rhodes?
No, I didn't.
And Seth Rollins. Those are my 2 additions. I think Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes obviously has been, I think I was scared post WrestleMania if he was going to be able to keep up with the hype and keep up the cheers and the popularity, because we know how fickle wrestling fans can be.
Yeah.
But if that's not been the case, he's as popular, he's as hot as he was. And I'm really, really happy for him on that point. And he's been pulling off some great matches, great storylines as well. And then Seth Rollins as well, just like the absolute workhorse world champion. We all agreed for the right reasons that he should be the one to take the world title out of Saudi Arabia. And he did so in a great match against AJ Styles. And he's just been carrying that Raw brand. I think perhaps in kayfabe, he should have been in the main event of Raw a lot more. But I think that's a booking thing. As far as his wrestling has been going, he's done fantastically. So I think basically that expands our list from 4 to 6. How do you want to play this? Do you want to say our crossover was Joe, Gunther, and MJF?
For the sake of simplicity, yes.
Yeah.
And also I guess we can sort of Cody and Bryan, we could always discount as just saying that as a tiebreaker, they haven't been champions, really. The other 4 fit that bill. With Seth Rollins, he has been a champion, not as long as the others. So we just disqualify it on that basis alone. Because it's like we're clutching at straws here, really, to choose who's better than the other.
And I think on that point, with MJF, although I don't think that MJF as a babyface is peak MJF, we did get quite a lot of time with him as a heel earlier in the year, and he was champion, and he has been pulling out banger after banger of wrestling matches as well. So frankly, I'm kind of inclined to put him as number 1.
I think I agree. I think that it's like he is the world champion. It's hard to discount, especially since he's been champion for the entire year.
That's right.
He's like I agree with you. Like I think his hype has diminished a little bit. It's gone down slightly, but it doesn't discount what he's done in 2023.
Right. And we've also seen layers to his character as well with him.
Have.
So I think that's actually that's been the benefit or the side benefit of him kind of slightly dropping down in level. So I think as a well-rounded character, which is a portion, is a component of wrestler, is doing well.
Well, that wraps up the categories I had to sort of talk about the highlights of 2023. It's been a very good year, I think, to
Very
be.
much so. It's really enjoyable. Great year for wrestling fans.
Yes. And hopefully, next year will be just as good. In the new year, we'll give some of our predictions on certain things. But we'll wait till the new year to come. We still got lots to come, including Christmas, including the holidays. So we'll wait till after that. But that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. Next week, we will review the go home shows of AEW leading into World's End. So plenty to look forward to there. Thanasi, great to have your company as always.
Thanks for having me. I think it was a really good show.
And thank you to tuning in, everyone. And until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.